Okay, good afternoon, comrades. As this is a communist university, I assume that you want to get some theory and some theoretical analysis, which I've prepared. But as this is a communist university, I assume that there's got to be some politics in it. And I'm going to present the politics first, up front, so that you know what political message I want to convey and where all this is supposed to be driving from. So, I mean, the first point that I want to make is that the two parts of the title are dialectically connected. There is an inseparable, not one tie, but several, a whole lot of ties between the fate of the yet incomplete Arab Revolution, that is to say, the national revolution, the bourgeois democratic tasks are far from complete in the Arab world, and on the other hand, the Palestinian problem. The existence of Zionist colonization and the Israeli settler state and its activity is one of the factors that has caused the Arab Revolution to remain incomplete. Compared to, well, I will compare it to something else, and it will make sense when I get there, but it has remained incomplete. Well, I could say compared to Europe, including those parts of Europe which, like the Arab world, were part of the Ottoman Empire. So they started from more or less the same starting point. And on the other hand, this is in one direction. In the other direction, I will argue that the Palestinian problem, the Palestinian-Israeli problem, is very unlikely to be resolved without the context of completion of the going forward of the Arab Revolution. So the two things are intimately connected. Now, this used to be understood by the Marxist left. It was, for a short while, understood by the communist movement before it became Stalinized, and then it lost this understanding, this view of the Middle East. And it was, and perhaps still is, one of the, well, I mean, it is or it was, at least as far as I know, the theoretical position of the Fourth International, the Mandel Fourth International, or Pierre Frank Mandel Fourth International. And it is also the standpoint of the group from which I come, and this is no accident, because the person who actually formulated the position of the Fourth International back in the 1950s and from then on was a Palestinian Marxist who published under the name of Said. If you look at all publications of the Fourth International, you will find articles by Said or by A. Said, and whose real name was Jabra Nicola. He was an Israeli citizen, Palestinian, born in Jaffa, and then lived in Haifa. And the same person was also a member of the group to which I helped to found in 1962, which was called Matzpen. Well, I mean, that was the name of the paper. It was officially called the Israeli Socialist Organization. Although the ISO was not a Trotskyist group as such, we had Trotskyist members, and the most prominent one was this guy. And he also, I mean, he didn't convince the majority about Trotskyism in general, but the position on the Palestinian problem and the Arab Revolution seemed, you know, was adopted by us and has remained, and I think it remained in force. It is as correct today as it was then, but I find that a lot of the left, the Marxist left, has forgotten it. And this is very regrettable, because what you find is that a lot of the left, and I mean the radical left, and I include only those who reject Zionism and are opposed to Zionist colonization and are in support of Palestinian rights. I exclude, therefore, you know, somebody like Shan Gamna, who is a sort of para-Zionist or quasi-Zionist, or who is at best soft on Zionism. But I'm talking about the radical left who accepts the analysis of Zionism. But as far as the Palestinian issue is concerned, is indistinguishable from non-Marxist, non-socialist. There is nothing distinctively Marxist or socialist in the position, let us say, of the SWP on Palestine and a lot of other groups. You'll find them arguing, in other words, the same position as various brands of Palestinian bourgeois nationalism. And that means that the positions veer or can be classified in two groups, and that is typical of bourgeois nationalism. On the one hand, opportunism. If you follow the now visibly bankrupt official leadership of the PLO, based now in Ramallah, which has capitulated really to Israel, and in effect is arguing a so-called two-state solution, which is in fact made at best 1.25 state. Nothing based on any kind of equality, but on you know, purely bourgeois grounds. I mean, there is no mention of any socialist contest, and you find some people on the left who support that line. And on the other hand, if the other side, I mean, the polar opposite in bourgeois thinking on the national question of opportunism is utopianism. Now, the meaning of utopianism is not that it is not possible to realize it immediately. I think the sort of the vision that I want to present is also not going to be sort of realistic in this immediate sense. What makes utopianism utopianism is that it is not accompanied by any scientific analysis or any process that is going to lead to that is what you want, to what you want. I mean, that was really the difference between utopian socialism and scientific socialism. Not that they wanted very different things, but or not that Marxists were very radically opposed to the picture that utopian socialism. That wasn't the main issue. The main issue was that it was not accompanied by any kind of process, except, you know, paint a very attractive picture of the future, and it sounds so attractive and reasonable, so all reasonable people will actually accept it, and one day it will come to pass. But there's no process that is supposed to lead to it. And as a result of this, because it is actually accepting one form of Palestinian nationalism or another, bourgeois nationalism, it has two limitations. Because it's Palestinian bourgeois nationalism, it is the whole vision is confined to Palestine, to an entity called Palestine, a country that existed as a separate political or even administrative entity for 25 years, from 1923 to 1948. Before that, there was no entity, discernible entity called Palestine, and then it broke up in 1948. And it is based in this box, and the only difference is how it should be configured, partitioned into two states, or configured as one state, or whether one state would be unitary or binational and so on. And this is the limit, this is the box in which the discussion is taking place. And I think connected with this is the idea that I mean, it's not actually, even among leftists, it's not associated with any socialist content. It is a purely bourgeois vision. Now, bourgeois vision, I mean, not even in the worst sense of the word necessarily. I mean, in the case of bourgeois nationalism of an oppressed people, there are progressive and radical content to it. But it is confined to the present social order. That is to say, capitalism. There is no sense in which the resolution of the Palestinian problem among big sections of the left. I'm not sure whether the Fourth International, I don't follow these things too closely, whether is still committed to the program that was formulated many years ago by Said Jabra Nicola, my late comrade. But I don't see any signs of it. In the discussions, I mean, the debate on the Palestinian problem is confined in the way I just described. Okay, so this is the critical political message. What I want to argue is the opposite. Of course, I mean, there is no question that one should support Palestinian national rights, the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination, the right of the refugees to return, equal national rights, and so on. But the question is, in what context socialist view of this problem should be contextualized, embedded? How should it be connected? Okay, so that is the political message that I want to get to and justify. But now I want to go to the theoretical side, and I realize that some of you may not be familiar with the history of the Arab world. First of all, what is the Arab world? How was it formed? And the original history, the more recent history, which is a background for the creation of the problem in the form that it developed since the First World War. So that's a huge span of history. Of course, I can only outline some bits of it, some important bits of it without going into great detail. So first of all, when was the Arab? What are the limits of the Arab world, and when was it formed? Well, it was formed as a result of the conquests of the Arabs, the real Arabs who came from Arabia. Shortly after the death of Muhammad, the founder of Islam, in Arabia, in Mecca and Medina, in Hijaz. Hijaz is the eastern, the part of the Arabian Peninsula that more or less borders on the Red Sea. That's the eastern part of Arabia. Islam originated there in the 7th century. Muhammad died, if I remember correctly, and please, if you note a mistake, correct me, in the year 632. Very shortly afterwards, couple of years, his followers, who conducted first of all a blitzkrieg and got really control over virtually the whole of the Arabian Peninsula, started to conquer in a blitzkrieg with relatively small armies but highly mobile, and they were able to conduct this warfare because these people were nomadic merchants and they knew how to equip caravans. And so they were very well suited to equip a mobile army, right? Nomads using mainly camels, but camels are very fast beasts, by the way. And they knew how to equip a sufficiently small force, but very well organized for conquering first of all the parts of the Middle East and North Africa. So they started with the Persian Empire, the Sassanid Empire, and very soon after the death of Muhammad, within a couple, 2 or 3 years, they actually defeated the Shah Yazid Greed, I think was his name, the last Sassanid Shah, and got hold of the Persian possessions, which were included what is now Iraq. Okay, and eventually they also conquered Persia itself. Then Syria, what is now, well, Greater Syria, which included, as I will mention later, also what Palestine, Jordan, Egypt, and then they went further to the west. Eventually they got as far as Spain. They actually founded an Arab caliphate in much of the peninsula, Iberian Peninsula, but well, I mean, I don't want to go into the details. What remains today is the Arabic-speaking countries that were conquered by the Arabs, but not really colonized by Arab people, because I mean they were a small force, but they converted the inhabitants to Islam, not by force. Actually, they did not force Islam. They had a very clever policy. Actually, they tried to dissuade people from converting too soon, because non-Muslims paid an extra tax. So if you converted to Islam, you were exempt from this tax. So I mean, the government was not so keen on conversion, but people were from their own part, actually, they had a material incentive to convert to Islam. And most of these countries accepted the Arabic language, and from then on are Arabic speaking in North Africa and the countries I mentioned. The exception was Persia. Iran preserved its language, did not accept the Arabic language except for religious purposes as a liturgical language, but not for literature or everyday life. So Iran is not part of the Arab world, but all the other countries that I mentioned in the Middle East and North Africa. And the Arab world is conventionally, and actually there is good geopolitical reasons for it, is divided into two great divisions. The Arab West, or the Maghreb, which is North Africa, not including Egypt, and not including, I mean, the dividing line passes more or less in the middle of Libya, conventionally. So Libya is, as it will, straddles both west and east. And then the Arab East, the Mashriq, which is the Arab countries from Egypt to the east. All these Arabic-speaking countries. There is also another country which is not part of the Arab world, and which speaks, a small country, and which speaks an Arabic dialect. And uses an Arabic dialect, and is part of the European Union. It's called Malta. But it is not part of the Arab world. It is conventional, although its language is basically Arabic. Okay, so this is what, now I will skip a whole, a chunk of history from the end, or from the 7th century, and I will go to the last chapter, the one before last. That is to say, the one just preceding the imperialist conquest following the First World War. And that is the Arab world, virtually the whole of it, under the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is called Ottoman because its rulers are descendants of a guy called Osman, or Othman, who lived circa 1300 in Anatolia, in the middle of what is now Turkey, you know, Asia Minor. He was a Khan of a state there, and his descendants started to expand their rule. And first of all, they turned west. I mean, they already, you know, had control by the 15th century. By the beginning of the 15th century, they had control of virtually the whole of Anatolia, except for the very tip, which was Constantinople, which was the center, the capital of the Byzantine Empire that still existed. And as far as the Arabs was concerned, this was Rome. The Byzantine Empire in Arabic, and I think in other Muslim countries, referred to as Rum. It means Rome, right? So they swept in this direction, and Mehmed the Third, the Sultan of this state, conquered Constantinople in the year 1453. Okay, so we are in the middle of the 15th century, and at first the conquering drive of this empire was westward. They swept into large parts of the Balkan and Europe. They got, I mean, the furthest point that they got to eventually was Vienna, and they were stopped. So quite far west, if you start from what is now the middle of Turkey. They got as far as Vienna, but they did not manage to take Vienna and retreated. But they held on to Hungary for quite a long time, and of course the Balkan, most of the Balkan Peninsula. And then in the beginning of the 16th century, they turned east, and they confronted what was then the existing Persian Empire under the Safavids. In 1515, Sultan Selim I had a great battle with Safavid Shah Ismail I in a place called Chaldiran, and Turkey was victorious. There is a bit about this battle that I can't resist telling you, because it has some strange, you know, ironic implications. I've read in one or two places that the reasons that the Ottoman Turks were able to win the victory over the Safavid Empire was because they used gunpowder and artillery. They had artillery. The Persians knew about gunpowder. They had access to gunpowder technology, but they reckoned that this was an unethical weapon of mass destruction, and it should not be used in a proper battle. And of course, you know, the Turks had no such grounds, and they won. And they were able to take because again, you know, what is now Iraq. What was called Iraq then is only the southern part of Iraq. It's near the delta. The northern part was called Al Jazeera. It was also under, and actually they bit into a part of Persia, into part of Iran, and annexed it. Then they turned to Egypt. The same Selim I conquered Egypt in 1517. They actually went into Baghdad in 1535. This was now the son of Selim I. It's Suleiman the Magnificent, as he is known, for a good reason. And then went on to conquer North Africa. And this was the foundation of the very large empire that existed until the 20th century, although it became sort of little bits were nibbled off it before that. Now let me explain in outline the political economy of this empire, because people who are not familiar with Asian or West Asian history make all sorts of assumptions, especially if they're Marxists. They would assume that this empire was something either feudal or in transition from feudalism to something else. Well, as a matter of fact, feudalism in the strict sense did not exist in Asia except in Japan. Possibly there are some people who say that it existed in Iran. I'm not sufficiently familiar with Iranian history, but I doubt it. Certainly in Japan there existed something very close to European feudalism. And the exception was in the Kingdom of Jerusalem established by the Crusaders in the 11th, 12th century, because that state was actually established according to a blueprint. And it was established by a blueprint it carried in the head of the Crusaders, who were led by feudal lords. And so they established, and in fact, the Kingdom of Jerusalem was the purest, the most pure model of a feudal state. But of course, it did not exist for very, very long in historical terms. So there was no feudalism. The source of surplus product was not, as in feudalism, it was actually an economy based largely on money and market. It was very much a money and market-based economy. Of course, mainly agricultural. The vast number of direct producers were in agriculture. And it differed from feudalism in that the source of the surplus product was rent collected from tenants by landowners, big landowners, collecting rent in cash. If you collect rent in cash, then the direct producer has to produce for the market, because he or she has to get cash to pay the rent, at least. So it's not only for direct consumption. Also a big source of surplus product, or surplus value in fact, was tax farming. Is everyone clear as to what tax farming means? It means that a big shot gets a sort of franchise to collect tax from the state. So, in fact, the arrangement is usually you pay up front and then you get it back from the peasants. So you are responsible for collecting tax in this part. That's your franchise. You pay the government for this privilege, and then you collect tax. And of course, you collect more than you pay, and that is the surplus. Debt bondage. That's to say, you lend money to the peasants, and then they, at steep rates of interest, and then they cannot pay, and they get more deeper and deeper in debt. And a lot of the surplus was from trade. It was a trading empire. It was actually, straddling the main trade route between the West, Europe, and the Far East. So a lot of the trade went through this. It was a very prosperous state. By the way, I mean, if you look at at its apex in the middle of the 16th century, it was far more civilized than Western Europe. I mean, in terms of technological level and culture and so on. And then things changed with following the great discoveries, the discovery of the New World and so on, so that the trade actually circumvent. They didn't have to go through Turkey, go through the sea route, and also, you know, I don't want to go into that. The state itself was, again, this is a difference from feudalism, and this is not only the Turkish Ottoman Empire, but also the Mameluke empire that preceded it in the Arab East, in Egypt, Palestine, Syria, was a centralized state with a professional bureaucracy and army. Again, unlike feudalism, you had a large professional bureaucracy and officers, both of whom were slaves. That is, again, you know, something quite unlike what you had in Europe. In the Ottoman Empire, about a fifth of the population were slaves, but they were not used for extracting surplus value in agriculture or anything like that, unlike the slave mode of production. Rather, they were used to some extent in domestic labor, as domestic slaves, but a very large part were actually snatched as children from neighboring countries, Christian countries, and various parts, and raised as slaves of the state. And they could reach very high status. I mean, being a slave was not something, you know, very sort of low down. The officers of the army were slaves. The big bureaucrats were slaves. They were slaves of the state. So they're not free people, but they could reach very high position. Actually, in the Mameluke Empire, the ruler himself was a manumitted slave. It was not a hereditary monarchy, but when the king died, the officers of the army, the Mamelukes, Mameluk, by the way, in Arabic means possessed. They are owned people. They are slaves. So the big shots of the army chose the new sultan, and he was, you know, he was raised as a slave, but then he became the ruler of Egypt in the Mameluke period. This was not the case in the Ottoman Empire. It was hereditary, and of course there were from time to time various usurpations and so on. But that is the kind of state that it was. So it was highly mercantile and based on market and money. Okay, so one more thing is important to stress. The Ottoman Empire was exceptionally, and that was correct also for other Islamic states, not all of them, but most of them, but certainly of the Ottoman Empire, it was very tolerant in religious and ethnic terms. Communities of various languages, cultures, religions were allowed a big measure of autonomy. This is called the millet system. They were referred to as millets. Millet is a community which has its own religion, maybe language, and so on. And they had a large measure of autonomy. The difference was that non-Muslim millets had to pay a special tax, but that was abolished in the 19th century under the reforms of the Ottoman Empire called the Tanzimat. Tanzimat is an Arabic word again. A lot of Turkish words are borrowed from Arabic. And it means more or less arrangements or reforms. And then everyone had equal rights. So there was no religious discrimination in it, let alone persecution, which, I mean, hardly ever existed in the Ottoman Empire. So everything went, you know, very smoothly until the rise of modern nationalism. And then, you know, we are into the 19th century, and you know about Lord Byron and his romantic support for Greek nationalism. So bits in the West, bits of the Ottoman Empire seceded and created national states, nation states. And this was the process that went on in Europe. It preceded, I mean, it went on earlier in the west of Europe, but then also in the Balkan, in the former or in what were then the Turkish provinces in Europe, national movements arose, and many of them got national. Greece is one case, Bulgaria another, and so on. So nation states were coming into being during the 19th century. At the same time, also nationalist ideology became widespread, began to sort of spread in the Arab parts, as well as in Turkey itself, as opposed to Ottoman identity. Turkish people, of course, at first some intellectuals and political activists began to develop a Turkish. We are Turks. We are not, and we have nothing to do with this. And of course, this was a secular ideology. And you can see the signs of this secular Turkish nationalism in Turkey today, which is still constitutionally a secular state. Right? When nationalism finally won the day in Turkey itself, it constituted a secular state in which religion is, it's like France in this. I mean, the model was France, laïque, right? And actually, public manifestations of religion were repressed. At the same time, also among Arabs, there arose nationalism, first of all, among bourgeois intellectuals. And that was, a new kind of identity. The old identity was religious, Islamic. We are all Muslims, irrespective of whether we are Persians or Turks or Arabs. Even the notion of Arabness was not finally coalesced. I'll come to that in a moment. It was a new construction, Muslims. But then these ideologues started to promote the idea of Arab nationhood, which in many ways similar to what was happening earlier in Greece. Yeah, I mean, Greece, and even outside the Ottoman Empire, in Italy. Italy was bits and pieces, but we are all Italians, right? That was the nationalist ideology. Characteristically and quite understandably, among the early promoters of Arab nationalism were Christians. And this is similar to, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, to what happened in Ireland. Among the early proponents of Irish nationalism were Protestants. And this is quite understandable because Catholic, in Ireland, Catholic identity was not something that could appeal to them. And in the same way, of course, there were quite sizable Christian minorities in the Arab world. They were Arabs. I mean, culturally, I mean, their language was Arabic, literature was Arabic, and they modeled their ideas on Western nationalism. Okay, and this sort of began to develop, first of all, in Iraq and Greater Syria, and to some extent, smaller extent, in Egypt. Egypt, you see, is a very exceptional state in the Arab world, and in fact, in the whole world. Egypt is the oldest existing discernible unity. As recognizable unity, political unity, Egypt has existed for thousands of years. It is the oldest state. All the other states in the region are newfangled, and their borders were, sort of changing all the time. They were not a crystallized entity. Egypt is Egypt, and it's defined by the Nile. Okay, so from the time, I don't know, the third, fourth millennium BC, when the two kingdoms of Egypt were united, the Upper and Lower Egypt, and then it became the dual kingdom, and Egypt has remained Egypt since then under different religions and rules and so on. but that's they've developed, you see, especially in Egypt, there was a tension between the ideology of Egyptian nationalism. We are a nation. To some extent also in Iraq, you know, local nationalism, but also a consciousness of Arab nationalism. And still today, and in Arabic actually there are two different words to denote. There is one word to denote local, you know, the local nationalist ideology of Syrian, Egyptian, Iraqi, and so on, and there is another term to denote the Arab nation and the ideology that refers to it. They are not necessarily contradictory, because, you know, like in Italy, the Arab world is heterogeneous. Okay, so the Turkish Empire is decaying and is more or less a stinking corpse by the First World War, and it's about to disintegrate. And the great powers, mainly France and Britain, are making plans for the empire, and the British actually, to win the support of Arabs in defeating the Turkish Empire. So, and you know the story of Lawrence of Arabia, this stuff. I mean, what Lawrence promised his Arab collaborator. He actually, I mean, Britain chose to put its money on a ruling family in the Hijaz. That is to say, in the Mecca and Medina. They had the big prestige of being guardians of the holy shrines of Mecca and Medina. The Sharif Hussein of Hijaz, who were being ousted from Arabia by the expansion of the Saudi dynasty, who came from Najd in the middle of Arabia. So these people were sort of unemployed, these princes, and Britain took them and made them head an Arab army, and promised the Arabs in general of the Arab East Arab national unity. We'll found an Arab state, and of course this was what Lawrence promised them, and in response there were sympathetic rebellions in Damascus, everywhere, you know, helping the British to liberate the eastern part of the Ottoman Empire. And of course this promise was betrayed, and in fact there were actually different plans afoot already, because in 1916 Britain and France came to a secret agreement, which later the young Soviet states published, so everyone could read what they decided, how to divide between themselves the provinces of the Ottoman Empire. And this is where the problems that we are facing today started, including Zionist colonization. Because what they did was to reconfigure the eastern part of the Ottoman Empire. Egypt, of course, remained Egypt. Egypt, even under the Ottoman Empire, was not really strictly controlled from Constantinople, from Istanbul. Egypt had a large measure of autonomy. So Egypt remained Egypt, but under British control. And Britain was actually controlling Egypt until sort of the middle of the 20th century, until the revolution of 1952. In the rest of the empire, Britain and France did the whole, you know, knew that they put everything in the pot, they mixed it up, and they defined states according to their interests. What had been in Iraq, they put 3 provinces together and made it into a state called Iraq. Actually, as I said before, Iraq originally was just the southern part of present-day Iraq, the Basra. That is, you know, in old Arab writings, Iraq means that. Then the middle of this was the province of Basra, province of Baghdad, and the province of Kirkuk or Mosul. They put them together and they called it Iraq. In Syria, they did the opposite. There was a state called, or not a state, it wasn't a state, it wasn't even a province, but if you ask an Arab living in Damascus or Haifa or Jaffa, where do you live? Then you would say, no, what are you? You say, I'm a Damascene or a Haifa resident or a Jaffa person. No, but what country do you live in? Now, they would say Syria. So Syria as a geographic entity had existed, and it's referred to in all Arab geography. There is no such thing as Palestine, for example, in Arab geography, in classical Arab geography. This was something newfangled. It doesn't even have an Arabic name. Palestine is in Arabic Palestine. It's a Latin word.
Philistia, isn't it? Philistine.
Huh?
Philistia.
Philistia. It's the Philistine, yeah. But it's a Roman, Roman word originated from the Bible and so on. But Syria, as opposed to Iraq, was broken up. It was broken up, and what used to be Syria is now Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, the Gaza Strip, and the West Bank. So all these were part of Syria. And of course, sort of the new local nationalism arose in this. I should mention also something very important when I talk about, I mentioned before Arab nationalism. Until well into the 19th century, the word Arab in Arabic itself did not mean what it means today. It meant the original Arabs, the Bedouins of Arabia, or any nomad. If you look at, for example, at the classical book of Ibn Khaldun, the inventor of sociology, Al-Muqaddimah, you will see that he uses the word Arab as what we would call nomads, the Bedouin. And even today, if you have a Bedouin tribe, let's say a Bedouin tribe, Hawatma, they are called Arab al-Hawatma, the Arabs of this tribe or this clan. But this is as opposed to the Arabic language, which of course was the language spoken in what became the Arab world, was called the Arab world. And so these early nationalists in the 19th century said, actually we are all Arabs, because we speak Arabic, our culture is Arabic, we belong to one nation, and we ought to have a nation state. Now, of course, this was promised by Britain to the Arab rebels, but betrayed, and what was created was a balkanized, divided Arab East, and in the middle of it was inserted Palestine, the state. Now, Palestine was a concept that had existed in Jewish and in Christian ideology, but wasn't really an Arab concept. But it was invented and made to measure for Zionist colonization. In 1918, the League of Nations began to sit and to grant mandates for administrating the bits of the Ottoman Empire, and it created an entity called Palestine, over which Britain got a mandate, and in the text of the mandate, it quoted verbatim the Balfour Declaration, which was really a letter written by Lord Balfour, who was foreign minister in the Lloyd George government, granting the Zionist movement rights to colonize Palestine. Actually, the original mandate included what is now Jordan, but the text of the mandate stipulated that provisions relating to Zionist colonization, to the Balfour Declaration, can be suspended or ignored as far as the eastern part of Palestine is concerned, that is to say, the part east of the Jordan. Thereupon, Winston Churchill, who was the colonial secretary, separated this eastern part of Palestine and called it Transjordan, and put one of the sons of this Hussein from Mecca, called Abdallah I, as emir or prince of this principality. And from then on, this happened in 1923. And from then on, Palestine existed as a British Mandate territory until 1948. Okay. Now, I'm afraid, I'm short of time. I spent too long on the early history. But now we come to 1948, and there is a war in which, in fact, Israel fights against the uncoordinated Arab states, each of which has its own agenda. In fact, Abdallah of Transjordan had a secret agreement with Ben Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, over division of that part of, according to the United Nations resolution of November 1947, Palestine was supposed to be divided into two states, a Palestinian Arab state and a Jewish state. Jewish state was supposed to be a little bit bigger, although the Jews then in Palestine were about a third of the population. But in order to accommodate immigration, and a Palestinian Arab state. Now, Ben Gurion and Abdallah agreed to divide between them the territory that was allotted to a Palestinian state, which actually came into being. But officially, Abdallah was fighting against the young Israeli state. In the south, King Farouk of Egypt sent his army, and in that army there was a young officer who found himself surrounded in a pocket together with other parts of the Egyptian army by Israel. The pocket was centered on a place called Fallujah, but the Israeli army was unable to actually overrun this pocket, and so in the end it was settled by armistice. And this young officer was called Gamal Abdel Nasser, who later became the great hero and real leader of modern Arab nationalism. In his memoirs, he says that the idea of the Egyptian revolution was born in this pocket when they were being besieged by the Israeli army, and they discussed how corrupt was the Egyptian state that actually, sent them to fight this war without supplying them proper equipment, etc., etc., etc. The whole place is under, British domination. It's not really an independent state. It's controlled by Britain, who also is present in the Suez Canal, and so on and so forth. And then a few years later, in the 26th of July, 1952, Gamal Abdel Nasser, together with a few colleagues, led an officers' coup d'etat, which was actually enthusiastically accepted by the Egyptian masses. He was an extraordinary figure among all. I mean, he eventually came to be regarded in the whole of the Arab world as the new Salahuddin, or to use Saladin. That's what he's called in English, Salahuddin or Saladin. He was the modern Saladin, an extraordinary figure of working class origin. His father was a postman, and of further back peasants. Went to a military academy. Was a extraordinarily straight guy and not corrupt, which was a novelty and is still an exception, in a lot of parts of the world. A straight-talking guy. At first, what he promoted was Egyptian nationalism, but then he began to clash with British and American imperialism. And that, actually got a huge response, massive, of the Arab masses around the whole of the Arab East. I mean, there are very few old-timers here who can remember, the images that we saw then in the early 1950s when Nasser started to confront imperialist domination of the Middle East. And then he realized that in order to confront imperialism, he needs to go beyond local Egyptian nationalism and promote the idea of an Arab nation. Let me read to you a very succinct description from a recent book on Arab nationalism, and what he says is, one is almost tempted to say that Nasser slid into Arab nationalism through the back door of anti-imperialism. And that, you know, that is very typical and actually correct, because he actually discovered empirically, but I wasn't a big theoretician, but he had that feeling that in order to liberate Egypt from imperialist domination, he needs to lead a movement towards Arab unification. And this got an enormous response, favorable throughout the Arab world. The masses actually, it's like they were waiting to hear it. Of course, things even got better for this trend when on the 4th anniversary of the revolution in July 1956, he declared nationalization of the Suez Canal, which was then under British and French control. And this was so enthusiastically accepted, not only by the Egyptian masses, but throughout the region. And of course, I mean, the French and British imperialists didn't accept this lying down, and they arranged a sordid conspiracy to invade Egypt, enlisting Israel as part of this. This was the Suez War of 1956. Okay. The conspiracy or this attack on Egypt failed, and actually it increased the prestige of Nasser. And this was the high tide of Arab nationalism. I'm coming, you know, now closer to the present. Nationalist revolutions or changes of power followed in several Arab states. In 1958 in Iraq, the monarchy was overthrown by a popular revolution. Actually, in Iraq was a big communist party, was arguably in a position to take power, but was persuaded by the Russian Soviet handlers not to go so far, and in the end they were massacred. You know, this is the common story. Was one of the two biggest communist parties in Asia. I mean, the Indonesian one and Iraqi. There wasn't a sizable communist party in Egypt, but there was quite an important one in Syria. Anyway, so in Syria also there was a nationalist government, pro-unification, and in fact, in 1958, the Syrian nationalists, under mass pressure and despite themselves, actually persuaded Nasser to create the first Arab Union, not actually a federation even, but a unitary state, a united Arab Republic encompassing Egypt and Syria with no common border. Okay, I'm coming to that. So this, of course, was ill-prepared, and it failed because the two bourgeoisies of Egypt and Syria couldn't really come to an acceptable arrangement, and in fact the Syrian bourgeoisie found that it is being dominated by the Egyptian bourgeoisie. They didn't get free access to the Egyptian market and so on and so forth. So actually Syria, which initiated the union, also actually dissolved it in 1963, and that was the nearest bourgeois Arab nationalism ever got to the project of unification, creation of a nation state. Okay, I think the history since then is more or less familiar, because the Americans, who were becoming the dominant empire and had actually were actually superseded the French and British imperialism in that area, decided that this Nasser nonsense has to end, and then they actually allowed Israel, contrary to their position in '56, where it was British and French acting on their own without consulting the boss. Now the Americans actually allowed Israel to attack Egypt, and that led to the, eventually to the dissolution, to the demise of these nationalist regimes. In fact, some of them actually degenerated, and you saw the result. Saddam Hussein regime was one of the sort of offshoots of this, degenerate bourgeois, petty bourgeois nationalists. So this is where we are at. Okay, now the upshot of this is that what is important is that in this, this project of the Arab Revolution was, the bourgeoisie was not able to complete it. So we are stuck with a situation which is in many ways like Italy before the unification of Italy. The Arab world needs unification not only because it has a common language and culture, but because it is economically a jigsaw puzzle that has to be fitted together. In one country you have a huge population without sufficient land resource. The average size of an Egyptian farm is 1 acre. Of course, it's an incredibly fertile land, and they have several crops a year. But imagine the average size of the family farm is 1 acre. Right? So even if you can have 3 or 4 crops a year, that's not very much. And Egypt has to import. Egypt, which used to be the grain, the supplier of grain to the Roman Empire, has to import food. And of course, there are now riots because of the rise in the price of the corn. On the other hand, Syria, which has much smaller population, has big reserves of Arab land, and so on and so forth. If you look at Saudi Arabia with a small population and hardly anything else, has enormous mineral wealth. Not only the oil, but now they've discovered in Hijaz actually they've discovered gold and bauxite. So watch this space. Actually, in Egypt also, there's in the eastern desert there is now some gold mining. There's a gold rush in that part. That's the part that faces Hijaz across the Red Sea. But so the population and the resources are very unevenly distributed, and in order to get anywhere, the place has to be unified in some form as a federation or what have you. But of course, Israel is in the middle and is threatening all the time, and is doing its best to prevent it. And this is part of the reason why it's supported by imperialism. So you have a chicken and egg situation. In order to get rid of imperialist domination, the Arab world has somehow to unify. But in order to unify, it has to get rid of imperialist domination and its local, let's say, ally, the Zionist regime. These two things are connected together. In the middle, there is the Palestinian problem, which is a focus for the national feeling of the Arab masses. Recently there was a leftist Egyptian journalist talking in a meeting in which I also spoke, and write to me, I'll give you the URL, his speech is actually online. You can watch a video of it, and you can see how the struggle of the Egyptian working class is connected in their mind to the Palestinian problem. The class struggle in Egypt, their conception of the national problem is Arabs, and their solidarity with the Palestinians are all bound together. On the other hand, if you look at the balance of forces, it is actually inconceivable that the Palestinians by themselves can liberate themselves because in order to do this, they have to defeat Zionism. And there is simply, the balance of forces is such that without the support of the rest of the Arab nation, it is inconceivable that they do it. And therefore, this leads to the political conclusion from which I started, that the liberation of the Palestinian people is bound together with the completion of the Arab Revolution. Whether the bourgeoisie, the Arab bourgeoisie, will be able to do it, I used to say it is impossible. Now I would be more cautious because I'm not a prophet, but I think, given the experience of the past, it is unlikely. And certainly the working class, which is massive in some parts of the Arab world, has to be involved in this. And this points at a socialist view of the problems of this region. Thank you very much. as for the rest, I also agree actually with Mike. I only used the term bourgeois democratic revolution because it's the conventional term. It is, you know, among many Marxists, conventional and probably mistaken to identify the task of, you know, various democratic tasks, including the national unification, as a bourgeois revolution. And you know, I take the point. I have no quarrel with this. On the other hand, I completely disagree with a lot of what, most of what Stuart said, because I think it is founded. I mean, it is based on, how should I put it, lack of sufficient knowledge, and it puts forward a whole series of false analogies. I mean, I think subsequently the point has been taken. I mean, you can't, I mean, the analogy with Africa after colonialism, or even with Nigeria, is a false one, because there you have, you know, many nationalities, many cultures, many languages. Even in Nigeria, Nigeria is a multi-ethnic, multicultural country where there are, you know, several different languages and traditions and so on. It was put actually together artificially by British imperialism. It's an artificial creation, and now of course one doesn't necessarily advocate the disintegration of Nigeria, but it is not at all analogous to the Arab world, where you have not only a common language, a common culture. Recently, a few days ago, a Palestinian poet called Mahmoud Darwish died. The whole Arab world mourned. Every Arab reads his poetry. It is, you know, Al Jazeera, which is based in some godforsaken principalities, you know, somewhere in the Gulf, is you know, is listened to as people in Britain listen to the BBC. It's their station. Actually, it is very significant that the most let us say technologically advanced bits of the Arab culture are unified, are felt to be all Arab. Egyptian films, I mean, Egypt has, I think, the third, after Hollywood and Bollywood, it has the third film industry in the world. The films are watched all over the Arab world. Radio is listened to. It is one cultural entity. And moreover, you could say this about Latin America. But contrary to Latin America, the Arab masses themselves feel as, you know, one nation. And this does not contradict the fact, and I think, you know, I've actually mentioned this before, and I stress that there, in the Arab world there are two tiers of national identity. And they are recognized and known to every Arab, and they use different words. National identity of an Egyptian as an Egyptian, or Iraqi as Iraqi, is called wataniya in Arabic, which means, translated roughly, as patriotism. The identity as an Arab is called qawmiya, which is a different term. They even refer to it. It is recognized in the Arab world. It's accepted that Arab national identity has two tiers, and they do not necessarily contradict each other, although the existing ruling classes actually play upon it because they are interested in preserving their own separate domains. I mean, because of the enormous reaction after the downfall of secular Arab nationalism from its heyday in the 1950s. Okay, but you know, I'm not a Leninist, but the guy said a few sensible things. Lenin is on record in the debate with the Bund, is saying, look, other things being equal, larger states are preferable to smaller states, both in terms of the development of capitalism and the interests of the working class. I mean, you know, that's, you know, it's absolutely correct. So if the Arab masses and the Arab working classes in the various countries feel that they want, you know, national unification, why should Stuart tell them no? You are, you know, separate countries, and you should be like Venezuela and Peru separately. Why? I don't, you know, and why should we, you know, as socialists, present programs that actually go against this very progressive feeling? I don't understand. Then He says, you know, the Hebrew speaking nation in Israel does not have the right to self-determination because it can only exercise it as a settler nation. Well, certainly, at present it does exercise it in this way, but how, I mean, are you a prophet? Can you tell about the future? Of course, as socialists, suppose there is a socialist revolution in that area. That national group should, I agree, for the obvious reason, should be accorded the right of national self-determination. Of course, on condition that it doesn't exercise it by oppressing others. If they cannot, if we then find out, we are not prophets, if it transpires that a given national group cannot, for some reason, reinvent itself as a non-oppressive nation, okay, then offer withdrawn. But how can we pretend to be, you know, in advance, to be all-seeing, all-knowing in advance? That
unless we're racist, unless we actually believe it's in their DNA.
But then Stuart has another argument, namely that when in South Africa we didn't speak about the rights of the Boer people to self-determination. Well, excuse me, but these are two completely different models of colonization. In general, there have been two models, and I cannot repeat this too often. One model, they differed essentially in political economy. What was the role of the indigenous population? Was it to serve as the source of surplus product? In other words, as direct producers to be exploited, or were they to be ethnically cleansed? In countries like South Africa, and there were a few of them, Algeria is another one, where the settlers actually relied on the exploitation of the indigenous labor, they formed themselves into a quasi-class. The whites in South Africa were not a quasi-nation, but a quasi-class. In countries like North America, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Israel, and I can name a few more, where the settlers actually relied on excluding the indigenous people, what was created was a sort of settler nation. So there are two, you cannot make an analogy between these two models, which are completely different. They belong to the same genus of settler state, but to two different species in the same genus, and you have to be specific, not general, generic. But then Stuart contradicts himself and speaks about a binational state in Palestine. If the Israeli Jews, the Hebrew-speaking people, are not to be accorded recognition as a nation-wide binational state, then you have to follow the Palestinian nationalists, you know, Hada Karmi and others, who say it will be a secular democratic state. That is to say that the Jews will be recognized as a confessional community, which is, of course, denies the actual reality. Yes, but my question is, why Palestine? You see, Zionist colonization created three entities, or apropos of Zionist colonization, three entities were created. The Palestinian nation, you're quite right, here is one of the few things with which I agree, that the Palestinian consciousness, the Palestinian as a Wataniya, were a product of Zionist colonization. In fact, it is a dialectical process. The two national entities were created as predator and prey, you know, in a dialectical contradiction. The Hebrew nation and the Palestinian nation as two poles of a dialectical contradiction. But, so these two entities, two national entities, and another entity called Palestine. Of these three, obviously the two people's group, national groups, are quite long-lasting. One that is ephemeral is the actual borders of the. You know, if we agree that the Palestinian problem can be solved only by a regional process, then I would think it is unimaginable that this regional process will take place without forming, at the very least, a federation of the state involved. And then, within a larger federation, local national problems can be solved much more easily, and we don't have to stick to any, you know, sort of borders that exist now or that have existed, for 25 years in the 20th century. it is a question of starting nationalism. Bourgeois nationalism starts from the real estate, the fatherland, the motherland, the patria, and then try to fit people into it. I think socialists should start from people and then, configure the real estate to fit the people, not the other way around. Okay, now I quite agree with Nick that it is unlikely that the bourgeoisie, given its decline even from its more progressive phase in the 1950s and 60s, it is unlikely that it, looking at its situation now, unlikely that it will be able to perform this task. So although I called it, I think, ill-advisedly bourgeois revolution, I think what the essence of it is, I agree with Mike and you that it is, well, at the very least, unlikely. I don't want to be too doctrinaire about it, because I can't prognosticate the future with any precision, but it seems unlikely that the bourgeoisie will be able to perform this task. The working class is both willing. I mean, the consciousness of the working class actually accepts this as a progressive task, as something that is felt to be in the interests of the working class, because again, listen to what this Egyptian comrade said in that meeting. I'll send you the URL if you remind me. A beautiful speech he made. Actually, it was an anti-Zionist meeting. It was a meeting called by Jews against Zionism. He's an Egyptian, not Jewish, and most of his speech was about Egypt. But you will see the connection. You will see the connection, and it illustrates in a very concrete way what I've been saying here. There has been a question raised by several comrades as to what this Arab. By the way, another thing. Why do we call it an Arab revolution? Well, as it happens, the Arab section of the Fourth International, the Mandela Fourth International, called itself this organization that used to exist. When I came to Britain, I met and had very comradely discussions with these comrades. They called themselves the Arab Revolution. That was the name of the group. Okay, so it's not some kind of bourgeois invention. Now the question is, does this Arab Revolution, does it encompass both parts of the Arab world, or only? Well, again, I don't want to be too doctrinaire about it. We cannot see the future. Developments, can happen. For example, what Tom pointed at, the possible integration of the Maghreb into the EU, which is a French initiative, that that may actually, we don't know. I think the likeliest thing to happen is a kind of double federation, which would have connections in between. That is to say, in any case, I don't think that the unification of either side of the Arab world will be as a unitary state. I think that is very unlikely and probably undesirable because of the local particularities of the various parts of the Arab nation. I think if Spain has a federal structure, if Germany has a federal structure, I think certainly, a unified Arab world should have a federal structure, not a unitary state. So what is most likely is to have, two closer federations in the East and West connected between them in some looser way, because they do share a lot. Although it is true that there is a distinctness of the West as opposed to the East, nevertheless, the literary language, the language of the media, and so on, is common to both parts. I'm coming to near the end. Yasmin, yes, of course. I think you're right as the first point that you made, that a non-proletarian unification can be dangerous, and in fact, experience has shown that if it is done in this way. And beside this, I assume that a progressive socialist region will have, apart from the closer unification of the Arab world, will have. Iran is also historically connected in a looser way. I mean, Iran is not Arabic speaking, it's got its own very ancient and very, you know, individual specific culture and so on. So it is not really part of, I mean, a lot of people think that Iran is part of the Arab world. This is ignorance, of course, but it has historical ties and so on. Turkey used to have it, but as Turkey, you know, by then, it could be well integrated into Europe. We don't know. So I think we have to leave a lot of things open. I mean, we can't be too dogmatic or too doctrinal about it. Were there instances of joint struggle of Palestinian and Palestinian Arab and Jewish workers? Under the British mandate, a few. Especially, you see, the two economies were rather separate, the secular economy and the indigenous economy. The exception were public services, the railways, the ports, and so on. And there were actually joint unions and joint struggles. At present, of course, the situation is quite different as between the occupied territories and Israel itself. Israel itself has a 20% population which is Palestinian Arab. And they are Israeli citizens, although discriminated and so on, that, yeah. I'm coming to conclusion, just finish replying to this question. And there are actually very favorable instances of joint struggle. Once, the sort of big political issues are pushed aside when it comes to actually, nitty-gritty of working class interests, you have instances, for example, of Palestinian Arab shop stewards elected in a workplace which is mostly Jewish. And because, I mean, when it comes to, class struggle, the workers suddenly forget about, the nationalism and so on. So there are promising instances. I wouldn't, paint a too rosy picture, but it is not, there are, let us say, certain buds of joint struggle, and there have been in the past. Of course, the Communist Party, for most of its history, was joint. Yes, I mean, it was a Palestine Communist Party, Stalinized completely. Just before 48, it split nationally into Arab and Jewish section, but then after the creation of Israel, it reunited and remained so until it sort of more or less petered out. There is a sort of remnant communist party, but which is about about as communist as most communist parties in the rest of the world. Thank you. Okay, Ireland is not a good analogy, but I agree with the conclusion. In fact, I agree that Israel, in its present form as a Zionist state, has no right whatsoever. And when one talks about self-determination for the Hebrew nation, I mean, I agree, with what has been said. That presupposes the overthrow of Zionism. And at the end, I will propose a way of, of actually dealing with it in propaganda terms, how to formulate. Okay. I think I've already dealt with the argument that these continents are already capitalist. In fact, my historical introduction actually led to this conclusion. They're not feudal or anything like that. They are underdeveloped capitalist countries, most of them. Most of them underdeveloped, I mean. Yeah, I mean, in my reply to response to Mike, I've already said, that I've used this term as bourgeois revolution simply for conventional reasons, and I mean that I don't insist on this term. It's a democratic revolution that is concerned with national unification. Whether the whole region, why only Arab? Well, look, I mean, these comrades, I think John has written a very interesting book about European Union and arguing from a socialist point of view in favor of European unification. But European unification is not on the same level as German unification. You see, and the reason should be obvious to everyone, because Germany is the one country with one culture, with one history going as far back as we care to go far back. the same applies to the Arab countries. I already mentioned that a regional socialist union would have to have some close connection with nearby countries that have some part of this history, but not. They don't share the same language and the same culture and so on. And Iran is the obvious example. South Sudan is not an example. Sudan was created by British imperialism. There is no reason to stick to the territorial integrity of Sudan. The South Sudanese are a separate nationality. They are, in fact, one of the three non-Arab national minorities in the Arab East, namely the South Sudanese, the Kurds, and the Israeli Jews. And they have to be accorded national rights in a socialist framework. Jerry's argument, the revolution in Iraq was Iraqi, any revolution in Egypt will be Egyptian. I don't understand this argument. You can use the same argument to argue against the concept of world revolution. Of course, the world revolution will not be synchronized, breaking out in all countries of the world simultaneously. I mean, everyone can see that. Nevertheless, we have a concept of world revolution. And similarly, in the case of the Arab Revolution, of course, revolutions tend to occur within existing states, although they have a tendency to spread like wildfire. But this is what we have. I don't insist actually on the term Arab Revolution. Maybe maybe we should speak about a socialist revolution in the Arab world or in the Arab East. Yeah. It is the concept that is important, and not to confuse it with a regional revolution, which lumps together, things that belong together on a different level, or not. Now, I'm coming to the end. I've just got one thing to say. The whole thing of self-determination as applied to the Israeli Jewish people is confusing because people may interpret it wrongly as the recognition of the Zionist state, to exist and the implementation of self-determination in an oppressive way. Of course, one cannot support this. How about, raising, first of all, the demand for equal national rights? And that applies on both sides of the divide. In the present situation, when we say we stand for equality of national rights, it means that the Palestinians who are now denied their national rights have to have national rights equal to what the Israelis already have. Given an overthrow of Zionism, equal national rights means that you will not, as Khrushchev said, we don't support exploitation of men by men, by only the other way around. So
the Armenian version. That's the Armenian.
Well, the Russians have attributed to the Armenian. Of course, it would be unjust and idiotic, and from a socialist point of view, unthinkable to turn around oppression by making the former oppressors into an oppressed nationality. But the slogan and the demand for equal national rights applies just as well, both before and after.
All right.